Yes, fitting tonight talking about imposter syndrome and really this whole concept around fake it till you make it. Just think about all the times where you feel like you don't have the ability to do whatever it is, or people are like, it's okay, you can just do it. You can just fake it till you make it. And it becomes really exhausting in terms of advice that we've gotten. And drop in the chat or give a high five or something if you've ever felt that fake it till you make it and you're like, okay, I am faking it forever. And will I ever make it? And how tiring and challenging that can be. And one of the things that I recognized, and I was really surprised as I was doing some of the research and learning about imposter syndrome, is that 82% of people experience it at some point in their lives. And it is something that is particularly strong in women. And it is something that women just tend to have. And there's a whole bunch of different reasons why that is the case. And we'll dive into those a little bit. But having imposter syndrome or self-doubt is something that it's normal, and it's something that kind of comes and ebbs and flows in different parts of folks' lives and shows up in different situations. But it's one of those things that we have the ability to turn it down. And that ability to turn it down is just a really important piece and opportunity that we have to be able to make the imposter syndrome something that's manageable and being able to recognize the signs of when it is popping up and appearing. So my imposter syndrome journey is I went to Harvard Business School, went to Wellesley College. I've been a director at different Fortune 500 companies. I was a VP of operations, a healthcare executive, and the vice chair of the school board, a foundation trustee, and an alumni association president, a civic organization president, executive coach, a mom, and a wife. And as I was learning more about imposter syndrome, it shows up for lots of ways for me. Overworking is one of the ways in which imposter syndrome shows up. And so there is a place for some folks, like with me, is this list of accomplishment after accomplishment to prove that you're worthy, to prove that that it's not a fluke. And some of it's proving to others outside, but a lot of it is continuing to prove to yourself. And in many of these situations, walking in and thinking, can I make it? Like going into Harvard Business School as someone who didn't do consulting or investment banking and being surrounded by all of these people and the quant jocks and having that feel like, oh my gosh, can I actually really do this? Or when I was interviewing for a VP level role, having come out of a director level role and feeling like, okay, I know I can do VP level work and I deserve it, this promotion and going to this new job, but how do I do that? How do I show up as a VP? And what does showing up as the VP look like? And I was like, I have to dress a certain way. And I've got to have my nails always done and the right bag and the right shoes and to give the aura of what does a VP look like? Because gosh, I'm not actually a VP and I've never been a VP before. And so that feeling of the imposter and how to show up in that particular way and recognizing how it even shows up at work when I have had to move into a new space or learn something new at work where I am working with people who've done it forever and are experts in it. And I'm supposed to lead those teams. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, they're going to know that I know nothing and they know everything. And how am I supposed to lead people who know all these things and I don't know these things, but I have to pretend like I know these things. And so that feeling like that imposter walking into that situation of they're going to quickly figure out that I should not be their leader. And in some spaces early in my career, I would do everything I could to learn all about their jobs and be able to do their job better than they could just to prove that I was worthy of being their leader. Seen some leaders where they make the team brief them to death about every single thing just so that they can have that security of knowledge. And so in those ways that it shows up, or even sometimes in coaching with a client of, oh my goodness, this person is a really senior executive and they are super smart. And what can they learn from me? I'm just a coach that's that has some training. This person is XYZ, and recognizing and being able to be comfortable with your own set of genius and your own set of brilliance that doesn't have to look like somebody else's and is just as worthy. So that is my kind of, as I started to realize that how imposter syndrome showed up for me and showed up in terms of overworking and proving. But I'd love to just share a little bit about our roadmap and how we'll dive into not only the imposter syndrome, but how to address it in going forward. So tonight we'll talk about unmasking self-doubt and really about how high achieving people often have feelings of inadequacy and the faking it till they make it. And how does that show up? And what are some of the root causes behind that? On night two, we'll start to talk about some of the negative self-talk and the patterns. They're called ants, automatic negative thinking, that start to creep in and start to undermine the confidence that we have in what we can do and how we are showing up and what our brilliance and what it is that we bring, and the self-doubt that starts to override the confidence. And then the last night, we'll start to talk about some of the strategies that help you dial down that negative talk and start to really find that confident person that's within you and being able to start to just to dial down that doubt. And some of the self-doubt signs, if you look at your workbook, there are about 10 different ways in which self-doubt shows up. Overwork, so always overworking, being that workaholic, taking on a ton of different projects. It also can show up in self-sabotage through procrastination, not getting things done. And so it's interesting, it can show up in either the overwork or the self-sabotage. A lot of in the high achieving, so having list after list of accomplishments, like on my previous slide of all the accomplishments, that fear of failure and feeling that you can't try something new or lean into something different because you will be found out that you're a fraud or that you don't know what you're doing. That failure feels so outsized. And so because that fear of failure, that doubt comes in. Discounting praise or feeling guilt about success. Some of the advice is when someone just gives you a compliment, you just say thank you. But the moments where you get a compliment, you're like, oh, thank you, but blah, 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 blah. Or, oh, no, it was really nothing. Or, oh, it's just like the discounting that. Or when you are really successful, feeling guilty. Okay, why was me? Like, why was I the one who was promoted? Or why did I get that recognition? That other person does blah, blah, blah better than me. And they should be doing that. I don't know why it's me. So feeling guilt about that success. The perfectionism of everything has to be super, super perfect. And it can't go out of the door if it's perfect. And if there is a typo, like on today's slide, right? Oh my gosh, there's a typo. Clearly they're going to know I don't know what I'm doing around teaching a class on self-doubt because I've got a typo on my slide. And how could I be a coach if I can't even do feel versus fear, right? That perfectionism that comes out, and then how that trickles down to the perfectionism that maybe if you're a people leader, you expect from everyone in your team, or if you have a family and they have to do everything perfectly exactly the way that you want it. The denial of your ability, and that denial of a little bit's kind of like the discounting praise, but some of it is oh, I'm not really great at math, or, oh, I'm not so good at building decks, or, oh, I'm not so great at communication skills, and all of the data and experiences that are totally disprove that. But that denial of, oh, I can't do that thing when you actually can. For some, it shows up is in terms of feeling unintelligent and feeling as if I'm not as smart. Yeah, like maybe I got into this graduate program, but oh my gosh, look at all these other people who are in this program and look at how smart they are. Or you join a new team at work and you're like, oh my goodness, look at how smart they all are and all the things that they can do. And I don't. And they're going to find out that I'm actually not that bright and I don't know. Or I've also seen that come up with people who perhaps maybe don't have a college degree, yet they've risen in the ranks and they're around people who have college degrees or master's degrees. And that feeling of, yes, I've risen that to that level, but they're going to know that I'm not as smart as them because I don't have that particular degree. So I've seen that self doubt come that way. Overestimating others and underestimating yourself. So overestimating how smart or intelligent or how easy things come to other people and giving them more credit than they are due, and then underestimating how well you do those things yourself and giving you less credit. And then lastly, difficulty internalizing those feelings of success. So when you've discounted the praise, you felt guilty about your success, and it's really hard to step back and to genuinely give yourself a pat on the back of, I did that and I did that really well. And it not being something of, and then it is a momentary flash of recognition of how well you do. And then you go back into the, yeah, but it wasn't that great because of blah. When you start to look at imposter syndrome, like there are different impacts of depending on like the body that you show up in, the gender impact around, like I said, women tend to show imposter syndrome more so than men. It might shock you that men tend to actually have the opposite, where they overestimate how fantastic they are instead of underestimate, where women tend to underestimate it. If you are from a historically marginalized and minoritized group, so Asian Americans tend to have higher imposter syndrome than Black and Latinx. And Black individuals also have imposterism, and that like creates just that psychological distress that like compounds with minority distress. And so if you, and when you put being a woman, and then if you're from a historically marginalized group, there's already the internal pressure one might have to succeed and prove worth and overcome self-doubt. And then add on top of it being in spaces where maybe you're a woman and you're in a very technical space that is predominantly male dominated. And so there's that extra pressure to be able to show how smart you are and what you can deliver, or you're in like in financial services, or you're in a group in a company that maybe is predominantly white and that is not your racial background. There's just so many ways when you were in that, you were in the minoritized person in that, for whatever, on whatever dimension, that just starts to compound the imposter syndrome. And the way that imposter syndrome, it starts to show up is there's these 4 hallmarks of it. So one, as we've been talking a lot about, is the diligence and hard work. If I am super diligent and I'm on top of it and I work really hard, then my stupidity won't be discovered because I've done all the things to insulate. I've thought of any question they could ask me in this meeting, I am prepared. And because that tends to work, then you continue and you get good results or feedback about it. Then you're like, oh gosh, I can't stop now, because if I stop now, they will recognize that I'm not as smart as they think I am, and I have to do this. So you get in this cycle of all this hard work and diligence. There's another, which is this intellectual inauthenticity, where you might have a contrary view than someone in the group, but you go with their flattery, and you don't share what your actual thought is on that particular meeting. You don't provide the information that like might take it in a different direction. You go along with what the person who you are trying to impress says. And so it's this intellectual inauthenticity of kind of figuring out what does the other person want to hear, and being able to then morph what you say and do to reinforce that. And that is how you get along from the imposter perspective, and not really showing what your true intellectual capacities are and what your true thinking is. And what goes along with that is the charm and perceptiveness. Is sometimes women, but I didn't really earn that. I charmed my way into that. I've always been told I'm the sensitive one or I'm the perceptive one. And so I just use my perception about what's important to that person to charm them into thinking that I'm really good at what I'm doing or that I'm really bright. And so it wasn't earned based on my intellect. It was, they like me, and that's why they chose me for that thing. And then lastly, it's seeking mentorship and external validation. And so latching on to finding someone who you've been able to figure out how to charm them and win them to your side. And then that person, you cultivate them as a mentor. And then that person tells you how wonderful and how great you are. And that brings the external validation that you're looking for, override the self-doubt. And so those are like 4 different ways that the imposter syndrome can show up with folks. And you get these self-doubt cycles, which is, on the one hand, there's you're worried about your performance, so you work really hard to cover up because you don't want them to discover you don't know what you're doing. You get your performance review. It was great. So you're like, oh gosh, I now have to continue on this path of working really hard because now I'm worried about my performance. Can I do that again? And so you get in this circle. The other way is you're worried about your performance and it becomes paralyzing. And so you procrastinate or you self-sabotage, and then you get your performance review, and you might get good reviews or you might get mixed reviews, which then creates more worry about the performance, which then paralyzes you, and you procrastinate and you get in this self-doubt cycle. I think about sometimes at work, in my brain, I've decided that whatever asked of me is super hard, and I don't know exactly how to do it. And so the energy that it takes to figure that out is so overwhelming, and I don't think I'm gonna do it, that I just put it off and don't do it. And then it creates, like, the anxiety of the, "Oh goodness, what's gonna happen because I didn't do this thing?" And then recognizing once I actually try it, it actually wasn't as hard as I thought it was. But I've had this loop because, and we'll get into some of the, like, where the loops start of, if it's not gonna be something that's really easy for me to do or I know exactly how to do it, I don't wanna do it. And I think there's also a piece, the procrastination, self-sabotage, the fear of failure of, like, I think about with my coach, I'm like, "Oh my goodness, am I really gonna do a 3-day thing? Because what if nobody comes? And what if I'm terrible at it?" And, like, rate all these things. So it's easier to hide and not do because then I will never have failed at that, and my imposter won't be shown, as opposed to you have something and 0 people show up, and you're like, "Okay, that just proved that I'm an imposter. I don't know what I'm doing as a coach." And there's just so many different places where that can show up. And as you think about those things, what is the cost of self-doubt? And in your workbook, these are listed, and I'd love for you to just think about which ones are showing up for you. When you have that self-doubt, maybe some folks start living someone else's dream and not their own because you've been told, "Oh, like, oh, you're the really smart one, and you should go be an actuary because you're really good with numbers." And that doubt of, "Oh my goodness, but I really want to be a hairstylist, and I think that's what I'm actually really good at." But right, that self-doubt, and so you end up living someone else's dream and not your own. Or decreased self-efficacy at work, or the reluctance, and there's the flip side of the reluctance to ask for help. So there is "Oh my, they're never going to promote me, so why would I ever have that conversation?" And so not going to have that conversation with your people leader around why you think you should be on a promotion track. Or there is "Wow, I'm in this role, I should know how to do that, so I'm not gonna ask anyone for help, and I'm either gonna work really hard to figure it out myself, the overwork, or I'm going to drown, or will self-sabotage and not do it, and not asking for the help because that's gonna show, right, that I don't know what I'm doing, and that I'm the imposter there." For some, it shows up with, like, organizational loyalty and not advocating for themselves. So similarly around asking for promotions or compensation, you hear people say, "Oh, I've been at an organization for 20 years and I know I should have left 15 years ago, but I don't think I can get a job anywhere else." Or "No one else is going to hire me." Or "Gosh, they treat me okay, but if I go somewhere else, they're just going to find out that I don't know what I'm doing, or it'll prove that I don't know what I'm actually doing." And so people tend to stay stuck in organizations, in situations longer than they need to be because they don't have the self-confidence that they can move out of it. And some are, like, getting stuck in unhealthy work dynamics, not only having loyalty to the organization that underpays you, but then being on toxic teams or being at a toxic company or working for a toxic boss and just not feel like there is another way out of it. And that then leads to a lot of, like, chronic burnout anxiety, depression of being in this particular situation and just feeling stuck and not being able to see your value. And that can affect your career planning and your goals and limiting your options because of the thought that I'm stuck here, I can't go anywhere else. And imposter syndrome in many ways leads to an inertia to really step into what you're called to do, an inertia to get out of tough situations. It's makes it tough for folks to continue to move forward. And I think you think about our work culture and like American work culture, it there's almost a pride in, oh my gosh, that's what's so crazy. I worked 80-hour weeks. And I remember someone was talking recently and I was sleeping on like in my office under my desk. And right, but there's this badge of honor that goes to it. And the thought that like it can't, that's the way it's supposed to be. Like there can't be something that's different. And even if I did leave, it's just going to be like that somewhere else. So I might as well do it here. It prevents you from seeing that it could actually be different and that you do deserve more or do deserve a different environment. And so I gave you a little bit of homework, and this is the Clance Imposter Phenomenon Scale. Pauline Rose Clance and Suzanne Imes in 1978 wrote the seminal article around imposter syndrome. And it's a really quick, about 20 question instrument that asks a bunch of different questions around ways that imposter syndrome shows up, and you just circle them and you add up your numbers. And on the back, it tells you what your score means in terms of scoring of having low, moderate, high, or kind of extremely high imposter syndrome. I think it's also as you go through the questions, it was interesting to me as I did it to see, oh wow, yeah, that really resonates with me of places and situations when the imposter syndrome shows up for me and other places where I'm like, oh, that's not really so much for me. So it's just a good tool to get you to start thinking about it. And then just as we round out a little bit today, what one of the important pieces is talking about what is the origin of self-doubt. And a lot of the research shows is like everything, it goes back to childhood and your parents and those early childhood roles. And then how does then being in society reinforce those? And so there is the person who is, I don't know if you had in your families, maybe you were the intelligent one. No matter what you did, you were so smart and everything came easily to you. And you were the one who got all the good grades and your parents didn't have to worry about it. And when they're like, oh, and Vanessa, she never has to study. Everything just comes to her and she's just so smart. And she's National Honor Society and she got this and she got into Harvard, she got into Wells, like all the things. And so you're reinforced in your family role of like, you're the smart one. And because of that, like the imposter syndrome can start to show up as, well, if I'm the smart one, then I'm not supposed to have to work hard. And now I've come into an educational environment or into a work environment where it's not coming easily for me. And so I must not be as smart as they think I am because I'm struggling. And there's also another flip side of it. If you get all of this praise all of the time about how smart you are and how easy it is for you, then at some point that praise loses its meaning. And so people start to think, "Well, how can that be true if everything that I do is so brilliant? Then nothing can be that brilliant. And maybe I'm not that brilliant." And so that can kind of show up in two ways. There's the kid in the family who's the hardworking one. So, your brother Bobby, he's the smart one. Sarah, she works really hard and she's always studying and she's volunteering and doing all those things. And so Sarah's not really that smart, but she is the hardworking one. So that position then sets you up later in life to be the one that's doing all the hard work and having to constantly prove to yourself and to others your worth because you're the hardworking one. And then the third role is the survivor. The one like, oh, things have been rough in Glenda's life, but Glenda, she survives it. She pushes through. She's the rock of the family. So whenever something goes wrong, everybody goes to her to fix it. And she is just that pillar and she wears the cape in the family and has survived so much and helps us get through everything. And so in the moments where you can't show up in that role or you feel like you're drowning and you're not surviving, like, how does that childhood role start to play? And it's some of the work in doing this. One of the cool tools is to use, if from a psychology background, the genogram, which you can use to plot different dynamics in families, but you can also use this in the imposter syndrome world to start to think about from your family's perspective, what were the different roles that were assigned to the kids in your family? And how was your interaction with your siblings? How are the interaction between you and your parents? How does that interaction now, if you have children or family of your own, how does that then create an interaction with them? And so the genogram is a really interesting tool that allows you to start to unpack some of these familial relationships. I'm so excited to keep the conversation going, and we're going to talk about automatic negative thoughts. But if you did want to continue to do more work on this, I am starting next week an 8-week confidence transformation class. And so, with the work that we've started here, like this is just scratching the surface of the framework that kind of takes folks through 9 different steps to addressing imposter syndrome. And so, there's a ton of different tools. I'm going to do weekly group coaching with some one on one coaching, having a peer group. We'll have a Facebook group as well as part of it. And so it'll be on Wednesdays at 8 o'clock from 8 to 9, May 21st through July 9th, as just an opportunity to start to work on all of this before going into summer. As you're exploring this and exploring the next couple of days, the making the investment in yourself and in your imposter syndrome is worth that time. As I've started to dig into some like, wow, this has been just really eye-opening about the ways in which I'm showing up. And usually the class would be $14.97, but since this is an introductory launch, I've taken $500 off, so it's $9.97. If you pay in full, it's $8.97 with like an additional $100 savings. And I'm going to also throw in 2 one-on-one coaching sessions. So in addition to the group coaching, doing one-on-one sessions with me, which is $1,000 value. And then if you sign up tonight, I'll throw in a genogram assessment. And so we'll do a more in-depth conversation around the genogram. So I'll spend time going through that with you and laying that out. And then we'll do another session to talk through how the genogram is showing up and how that's starting to impact it. So there's a QR code, and I'll also send a link tonight. But just putting that as an offer as you start to spend more time over the next couple of days and thinking about it, if this would be something that would be supportive for you. For tonight, we've started to talk about what is imposter syndrome and unmasking that self-doubt. And then tomorrow we're going to spend time of like, I like to call it of, would you say that to a friend? The tape that runs through your head around your negative self-talk patterns. And how do you start to identify what those patterns are? They tend to fall into a couple of different categories, and starting to identify like, what triggers you to go to that place in your brain. And so I will send out a workbook for tomorrow where we'll start to work through that and talk about our ants. And they're called ants because you know how ants can lift, I'm going to get the number wrong, but it's like 100 or like 1,000 times their strength. And so these automatic negative thoughts are teeny tiny thoughts that come in, but they can totally derail you and give these thoughts much bigger space than they are worthy of. So we'll spend some time on that tomorrow.